Thanks, everyone. My name is Leo. I am the CEO at Grip Security, and I'm going to talk about SaaS security architectures and the challenges behind SaaS in the modern age. The reason I'm familiar with SaaS security, so as I said, I used to be the CTO at Wild Ventures, a cybersecurity-focused VC investing solely in security, which led me to see and talk with security experts about the SaaS security challenges that they're facing. And then from that, founded Grip Security, which is a SaaS security platform. And what we do with our customers is to help them discover every SaaS application and user around their company, which led us to understand some of the critical problems about how SaaS is being used today in this age of business-led IT. So many of the statistics that we show are based on our findings, our ability to know how many applications are connected to SSO, where zombie accounts reside, and how often companies forget to deactivate accounts for the ex-employees. And we gathered that into a presentation about the existing challenges within SaaS and compare that, of course, to all of the traditional ways and technologies that are used today in the market. So the agenda itself has this presentation. Let's see. Yeah. But I'm going to talk about the problem of SaaS in general, dive into technologies, and then talk about some of the recent breaches of April that show why SaaS is such a problem for organizations. Now, SaaS is everywhere, and still SaaS security is not a new problem. SaaS has been with us for almost dozens, like 20 years, since the early days of the Salesforce and other companies of the world. But the magnitude and scale of SaaS adoption necessitated a change in how companies think of the SaaS security architecture. This traditional paradigm of a closed perimeter in which users and data and app resides doesn't longer work when applications are everywhere. And this challenge of understanding where data is going and why, to gain visibility to every SaaS and users and enforce policies and who can access the different applications is significantly harder. Now, when trying to conceptualize just how many SaaS applications are used within an enterprise, it's very hard to do that when thinking of just a random group of applications like I did right here. A simplified way to do that, and I'm assisted by Sunil Yu's cybersecurity metrics, is to think about the security stack of security organizations, which is easier to think of. Every organization is using an EDR, an email security, SCA, SASE, CSPM, a ton of different assets. I just picked a group of, let's say, 10 applications, but usually the numbers we see for even smaller organizations is somewhere between 15 and 20 different apps. And when you think of those, 20 apps only used by the 10 to 15 members of a security organization, meaning that for the bigger organization, there's almost every business unit using their own set of applications. When we hire a plumber, we expect them to bring in their own tools to do their job. It's not that different for the different business function within our company. So if you think of marketing and security and DevOps and sales and customer success, finance, data engineering, all of them together using their own set of apps, this easily adds up to somewhere between 150 to 350, and for bigger organizations, of course, there's more, of business critical SaaS applications. Those are applications that do not only hold data, which is traditionally thought of as the sensitive or the problem within SaaS. These are applications that manage a business and the way it operates. And they could have access to things like customer automation platforms, automating emails sent to different customers. They could have access to corporate IP, like designs and future products. They could have access to security configuration or IT configurations or production environments. All of those are managed through SaaS applications. And of course, not knowing that the application is used can lead to future are problems that are traditionally solved by having a firewall and a closed network that users are bound to log in from. Now, one of the pictures I added here, this is by courtesy of Blissfully, and the SaaS, SaaS usage report, not security necessarily, is the top marketing app by business unit. Specifically, I chose marketing. And I want everyone to look at it for a second and count how many of the logos do you recognize? Now, second question, if you had to prioritize your existing resources to secure those applications, whether being security configurations, access attestation, just things you need to deal with apps, what would be your top 3 choices? The first time I've seen this was August 2020 when I saw this report for the first time. Back then, I used to be a venture capitalist investing in security. Those were the exact same questions I've asked myself. And the main problem I had as an individual is that I don't recognize most of the logos. So I know MailChimp automates emails and HubSpot is a CRM, but Screaming Frog or Vantive or SEMrush are applications I wasn't familiar with. And this helps to understand the challenges that security organizations have when dealing with SaaS. There are just so many of them, and every one of them has different configurations, have different risks it presents to the organization. And just from seeing a long list of URLs or even company names, it's almost impossible to understand whether this is something that requires the attention of a security team or not. So as an example, one of the traditional ways to manage or govern usage of SaaS is to use some sort of, let's say, a proxy and let it prioritize how, or at least block users from accessing certain applications. The problem is that the SWIGs and proxies of the world are very good at knowing about problematic groups of websites, gambling websites, share drives, hacking forums, and so on and so forth. They're not as good at identifying SaaS and its usage, because most applications realistically would pass a GRC process. They're not an inherent risk to the machine. For example, gambling websites can theoretically cause viruses to come into the environment and laptops. It's not the case with something like Mixmax or SEMrush. And as an example, SEMrush, the second most used marketing application by market share, is actually one of the least sensitive ones within this list, because SEMrush is an SEO tracking and management tool, meaning it only tracks external information and helps the company prioritize its resources around what keywords they need to follow on to appear to rank high on Google. It doesn't hold company information. While other applications here, like let's say Cloudinary or HubSpot, do hold sensitive information of the company. Now, looking forward to how SaaS discovery in general is being done, I want to think of the steps for improving the security posture of our organization. What are the missing steps the security teams take today but have challenge scaling to the entire SaaS portfolio? So the first one is to identify business-led IT and data sets. Know what applications are used and how users are using them. Then to map the connections between applications and their lifecycle, understand which application has access to what resources and other applications, and how users onboard to them and offboard from them when they leave the organization. And the third is to manage security configurations around those applications. Now, one of the initial reactions to this process is this is what we use SSO for. So This is why we connect our applications through SAML to identity systems to manage both the offboarding, onboarding, and offboarding of the users from the applications. But this solves the middle problem. It doesn't solve the edges. It doesn't. You cannot connect to SSO applications that are not known to the security team. And it's and connecting an app to SSO doesn't help you improve those security configurations just by having it connected to a security system. The only two configurations it theoretically solves is having a secure identity for offboarding and to propagate MFA automatically if configured in something like Okta or another app. And this is exactly where we see this challenge of the organization, where realistically, given again our findings, which are based on the SaaS usage of almost over 1 million different users and employees, only 20 to 30% of the SaaS portfolio of the organization, and by that I mean the business critical SaaS portfolio of the organization, is realistically connected to SSO. And I've taken the 5 reasons your apps are not connected to SSO for one of the Security Boulevard articles that we published a few months ago that are showing the different reasons as for why applications are not connected. So the first one, which is quite common, is the SSO license cost, what is often also known as the SSO tax. And I'll share in the link one of my favorite websites, which is sso.tax, for everyone who's interested. So I was missing some slashes. So many applications require an extra payment for their licensing cost. SSO is the ability to apply a single sign-on platform, having your users identify and log in into the system using an IDP originated user instead of using a username and a password for every application. But this feature, this ability to support SSL, is often a feature that requires extra payment from different SaaS vendors. As an example, a user for Canva, which we saw before, the 6th most or 4th most used app for marketing teams, costs $8 a month if you don't have SSO, but $30 a month when you do have single sign-on capabilities. And this difference is because many SaaS vendors understood that security teams are pushing to approve only applications that support SSO. Well, there's a problem is that this additional budget, which is a 300% increase, comes out of the marketing department pocket or the DevOps department pocket, but is pushed by security. So for many organizations, it's either better to bypass security when acquiring the app to save tens of thousands of dollars on the cost, or to sign a waiver from one of the SVPs to not connect the app to a security system. Now, this always becomes the same problem. What happens when the user leaves? How do you revoke their access? Do you trust the marketing department, which are also the local administrators of Canva or HubSpot, to actually revoke the access of the user when they leave? And this is, often the reason we see shadow accounts. Second reasons as for why SSO is hard is that for many applications, it's just not supported. It's not a feature that is supported by every app out there. There's tens of thousands of apps that just don't implement the capability yet. Third reason, which is more common than I think people understand, is that many of the SaaS that are different business departments use are actually owned by a third party, by one of our partners that we work with, who, in a sense, shares our users with us. Just a few days ago, I got an invite to Monday.com, where our designing studio that we work with manage the tasks around building a website. Every company, when going through an audit or through a fundraising process, have an external auditor or a law firm that share a Dropbox or a shared drive with them but this drive isn't managed by the organizational IT system. So there's a Google, currently a Dropbox drive that has all of our financials, specifically for Grip, where the users involved in the process had access to it. And if they were to leave, by design, still have access to it continuously, because I don't have neither the ability to connect it to SSO or to revoke their access. The only way I could do it, and we already did it, of course, because we're mindful of SaaS access, is to ask the vendor to revoke access and delete the data. The two other reasons, which are fairly realistic. The first is the SSO implementation backlog. It just takes time for security teams to do that. And this is often not a data-driven process. So there's a huge backlog of applications they've never connected. And the second reason that is the fault of the security team is just there's many applications that are unknown to security and IT, so they can never get into the backlog. And of course, I encourage you to read the article. It talks about all of them and how you can mitigate problems there. Now, as I said before, the challenge with SaaS is that it's based on the old perimeter. We assumed for years, given the traditional security paradigm, that users can connect to applications that are in an existing perimeter. But now with SaaS, this perimeter doesn't longer hold true. You don't need a VPN, or you don't need to be in the network itself in order to connect. And the applications are internet-based. So instead of having a network choke point through which users go to the data, to the apps, now they can just go by themselves through any network and any device. You can pull out your phone from your pocket today and sign into an application that is used managed by your employer. Now, when thinking of the traditional solutions, the legacy first wave of SaaS security, most people think of CASB. CASBs were either API integrations to the most popular applications or proxies on the network that funneled the data through and mapped both usage of apps and enforced data policies on top of it. But all of them have inherent limitations in the way they work. So for API-based CASBs, meaning once you integrate one by one per app, they have the limitation where they only support the applications that they've built a connector to. And this is realistically somewhere between 5 to 25 different apps, which is only a fraction of the existing SaaS inventory of an organization. The second solution, which are proxy-based, assume that the app is either accessed through a corporate device or network. Traditionally, devices, especially the network, now we're seeing a shift towards SSC-like CASBs that focus on a device-centric access. But second is the reverse proxy, which is limited to applications that are governed through identity solutions and SSO. The problem with all of them is that they have a very hard time to scale, but also given the way visibility is given to applications, when doing discovery process, the accuracy and actionability of the data is not on the same level we would expect from a security solution. And this is for a few reasons, and I'll dive into the different ways to do discovery. First one is doing discovery through identity systems like Okta, which almost by definition means that you can discover the things you already know about because someone had to connect the applications to Okta itself. Now, the second option is to do it through systems like firewalls, proxies, SASs, and CASBs, but they have the limitation to know only about things that are accessed after they were deployed. So if I look on the third row, immediate detection, while Okta Discovery discovers everything that was used in the past as well, given the logs, firewalls or SASE detection or CASB detection takes about 6 weeks to 3 months just to get the initial results, and doesn't have the visibility, the historical visibility to applications that were used for 2 years but were never accessed. The third method that we see today is tying into expenses and expense systems, either by using automated solutions or by building an internal workflow within the organization that requires the security team's approval before approving a SaaS payment. Both of them work. Of course, the coverage is only for paid and sanctioned systems. And many applications today, by the time they reach security, one of the business departments have used the applications for 3 months, 6 months, and invested a lot of efforts in using them. And even when they discard them, there's still data there and access to different sensitive resources of the organization. And it also becomes very hard to deny a request for using an application after the trial mode is over and the different business units have invested time in using it. In terms of depth, there's a challenge when looking at expenses where you don't know, you know what app is used, but there's no visibility to the users behind it. This is why we often see the automated expense system discovery selling to IT and financial organizations instead of CFO departments, instead of selling to CISOs. And this is because of the challenge of building security use cases when you don't know who the users are. But it does help prioritize SSO and gain visibility to all of the things that you need to work with. In terms of discovery, so there's immediate discovery for old with expense system for all the applications that were used. And when new applications come in, you see them when the bill comes in, which is often 30, 60 days after the user have started to pay for it. Fourth option is browser plugins, which is similar to SSE detection, but has a browser context into whether the user is using the application for a private use or corporate use, which is one of the most important differentiations in the ability to understand SaaS, just because there's a ton of noise in tracking how users are using different applications. And we want security teams to avoid chasing down every alert just to understand it's a false positive. If you look at the SaaS through the network, you only know when a user goes into the website, which is the CASB way. So it's very hard to differentiate if they log in with a corporate account or read a blog. But browser plugins, even though they're not challenging to deploy, but you need to deploy them, they gave more granular visibility into how users are using the apps, but they have the same limitation of seeing into the past, understanding apps that were used before they were installed. And on top of that, just added a fifth row because there's a new generation of technologies. I include myself with them, but there's a new generation of technologies that can do SaaS and user detection and go both continuously, immediately as new applications arrive, and give visibility to historical information. And there's a few different mechanisms of doing that, either by tying into communication systems, browser history, and following other footprints of users within left by applications within the organization. Now, getting to the third piece of the presentation, I wanted to talk about the recent challenges that we've seen with SaaS application, meaning recent breaches of SaaS and how they affect different organizations. As a SaaS governance solution, we help our customers understand when they have a breach, how they can deal with the breach itself. What's interesting about it is that the first question that security teams ask when there's a breach of a famous SaaS app, let's say Travis CI, which is the next slide, is not what are the risks that this poses to my company. The first question that is always asked is there someone in the company using the SaaS app? Because unlike other systems that are easier to manage and understand when you use them, it's almost impossible to know if there's someone not using an app within a company without having an automated way of doing so. So first example, this is from the Block Breach Security Magazine posted about that occurred 3 weeks ago, where specifically for Block, one of the ex-employees had access to one of the SaaS applications, and they weren't aware of it. He left the organization and downloaded and published the data of 8.2 million users. Now, I think the risk in this case is obvious. There's sensitive assets that SaaS applications have access to when users regularly communicate with when they work for the company, but then after they leave, it becomes a real challenge to track whether you actually revoke their access from those applications, and by that revoke their access to the different sensitive resources. As I said, next slide is Travis CI. Travis CI has access to production environments and can turn the production systems on and off, which is almost a bit of a risk as exposing the data of 8 million users. This is the risk. The solution is, of course, to identify the application, manage access to it, either by connecting it to identity systems or building a workflow, whether manual or automated, to revoke access in case of change of control. Now, second breach happened a few weeks ago, and I've taken that from the stack, is where Heroku and Travis CI, both systems were breached. At least the OAuth tokens of those applications to GitHub environments of different customers were stolen. And in that case, we had a risk where one app was breached and it leaked the information of another app because of internal connections. I've seen on the agenda, Yoni Shochete was here yesterday, not yesterday, earlier this morning, and speaking about SaaS to SaaS integrations. This is one of the biggest risks we see out there, where applications are connected to each other, and those applications have ongoing connections between them to the existing sensitive assets of the company. The third risk that we look at is how customer data is exposed by different applications that the company uses. And specifically, the example I've chosen was HubSpot, where HubSpot was one of the employees was using an app not connected to SSL and was phished. His credential was phished, and then the bad actor was able to use those credentials to access the customer data of different HubSpot customers by logging into different systems that they own. This is another challenge of the what's often called the SaaS bomb, the SaaS bill of materials of the company, or just the supply chain risk of using SaaS applications. Well, if an application is breached, some of your existing data or customer data could be exposed as well, even when your company by itself has a very good security posture. Now, supply chain security is one of the biggest challenges of the last 2 years, but it doesn't only focus on existing systems that I built internally. And there's a real challenge with the third-party owned supply chain around SaaS applications. So nearing the end of the presentation, if there's any questions at the moment, I'd be happy to answer them. And as always, very excited to be here.